Alright guys, it's been a while. Now, where were we? Ah yeah, Pokemon Sword and Shield. What an absolute fuck. As somebody who'd stuck with Pokemon and even flatly defended it during its decline in the 3D era, this game felt like a massive slap in the face. As a kid, the Pokemon label was synonymous with high quality, feature-rich games that would keep you occupied long after the credits rolled. A strong go-to for those on a limited budget. However, for a long while now, the goal of the Pokemon company seemed to be cutting costs and providing the minimum viable product. Rather infamously, when asked why the Battle Frontier wasn't included in ORAS, people are on phones now, so there's no point. I'm sorry, but if people are choosing to play Crossy Road or Roll for Waifus, then that's entirely on you. Make a better game. It's not really something you can describe with words, but you can tell when you're playing a game when the people behind it actually gave a shit, and Pokemon Sword and Shield was not one of those games. It was store-brand Pokemon for the Switch, and while you could do much worse, it left a long-time fan like me longing for the days of old, something with genuine passion behind it. Pokemon Legends Arceus was set to be just that, a game that would put a new spin on the Pokemon formula while still keeping the fundamentals, allowing players to step into the Hisui region, the Sinnoh region's ancient past, heavily inspired by Japan's Meiji period. Pretty early on it was decided that a remake was actually not on the cards. This comes from a Game Freak leak. Game Freak wanted to experiment more with open world game design, something that the rigidity of a remake would obviously not allow for, especially not a faithful one. But hang on Jack, isn't there already a Diamond and Pearl remake? Yeah, see, there was a tiny flaw in that plan. See, this game was set to launch in 2021, but had to be delayed. So Game Freak scrambling at the last minute decided why not just cook up a Diamond and Pearl remake? For that they contracted a third party studio, Ilka, and that went just about as well as you would expect. I mean, thank God they did. I mean, how else were we going to survive a whole 3 months? Any longer and their shareholders might have had to have bought the slightly less expensive Ferrari. The result was a car crash, followed by a pleasant surprise. Pokemon Legends Arceus has gone on to be the most well-regarded Pokemon game in a very long time. Opinions on the newer games vary all the time, however it seems that this game is one that we all collectively agree is actually pretty good. But what do I think? Do I like this game? Short answer is yes. Long answer, we start moving slowly towards the light, Goat Jesus giving us the usual rundown before we're thrust into an unknown world, unconscious on the beach. It appears Truck-kun is up to his old tricks again because we've essentially been isekai'd. Nothing but the clothes on our back and a smartphone with the world's most impractical case. With nowhere else to go, the player is given a Pokemon of their own and is forced to enroll as a member of the Galaxy team in exchange for food and shelter. Along the way, solving the mysteries regarding that dimensional rift in the sky, as well as quelling the resulting rampaging Pokemon. Pokemon Legends Arceus doesn't really have that much in the way of story, and for that I'm glad. You know, every now and then Pokemon can write some pretty solid stuff, and then there's the other 80% of the time. You know, with how dialogue heavy some of these newer games have gotten, I feel like these games have kind of lost something in terms of replayability. Arceus isn't completely immune to this, it's still a very handholdy game at the start, however when you get past all that you are generally left to your own devices. However, before we can join proper, we are left with one daunting trial. We need to catch some early route Pokemon, Bidoof, Starly and Shinx. Apparently this task was so difficult it leaves everybody awestruck. Apparently most people who try fail. It's a wonder how we ever managed to evolve as a species when this is considered a dangerous predator. Lucky for them though, I know a thing or two about handling beavers. The fact that this game's less chatty has the unfortunate side effect of having the characters not being particularly memorable. Most of these you'll talk to for one task and never speak to again. It's like being back in college. I don't have a clue who any of these people are outside of Adamant and Irida. There is one standout character, but we'll save him for later. Pokemon Legends Arceus is actually quite a big switch up on the traditional Pokemon formula. Rather than journeying across the region, stopping by towns and taking on gym badges, you're instead stationed in Jubilife Village. From there you can travel to one of 5 large environments, each housing radically different biomes and a near 250 Pokemon for you to hunt down and stuff into an electronic prison. But before we do that, we need a Pokemon of our own, so let's see what we're working with here. Turtwig, Piplup and Chimchar, right? Actually no, in a surprising twist we're given a choice between Rowlet, Oshawott and Cyndaquil, each of them having a new fully evolved form. a vagabond, a samurai, and a chain smoker. Hisuian Decidueye's grass and fighting type is a bit of an unfortunate combination. Breloom gets away with it because it has Spore, but in the case of Decidueye, it's not a bad Pokemon by any means. It's just very easy to target. It's got a pretty banging moveset though, with moves like Brave Bird, Sucker Punch, even trading in Nasty Plot for bulk up. Its signature move, 3 Arrows, lowers the Pokemon's defensive stats as well as increases your critical hit chance on your following moves. This applies to all moves and not just 3 Arrows itself. Overall, pretty awesome stuff, although a bit outclassed I'd say. Grass isn't exactly the best offensive type, and in terms of fighting type, you're already competing with Infernape and Lucario. Not a bad choice, but personally I prefer what's up next. Samurott has now been gifted the Dark typing, complementing its already great moveset with moves like Night Slash. Its signature move, Ceaseless Edge, has only 65 power, however it leaves lasting residual damage akin to spikes. Out of all the starters, Samurott is probably the most unchanged from its counterpart. The name of the game is still very much the same, hit your opponent hard and fast. Now its type just lets it lean into what it was already good at. Lastly, Typhlosion is now part Ghost type. Pretty neat combination that we don't get to see all too often. This of course means that we gain some new Ghost type toys as well as immunity to normal attacks, making for a pretty reliable switch in. Typhlosion's signature, Infernal Parade, is essentially a cracked version of Hex. 65 power to start, doubling if the opponent has a status condition, with the move itself having a 30% chance to burn the target. Death by 1,000 cuts is the game plan here. Overall, really solid stuff, different enough to give them their own unique identities over the originals. Its exit brought with it many negatives, however one of the benefits of these games not having to be fully compatible with each other is that we can now have more new Pokemon per game, and let's face it, that's pretty much the only reason why any of us are still playing these games. In addition to the starters, you've also got entirely new evolutions for old Pokemon, most of them obviously being from Gen 2. I'm pretty mixed on these honestly. Basculegion is fucking awesome. Same goes for Cleavor, love that design as well. I also kind of dig Overcrawl, it looks like one of those sea mines. The only evolution I'm not all that sold on is Sneasler. They basically took Sneasel and just elongated it and it just looks kind of wrong. Probably the most unnecessary evolution since Weavile is still plenty viable. But I guess you could also say the same for Cleavor. Out of all the new Hisui forms that aren't the starters, Hisuian Braviary is probably my favourite. Jet black with flames coming out of its head, badass. Added Psychic Type 2 is just the cherry on top. Arcanine is probably the runner-up, it's very hard to ruin a classic. The fact that they made its mane and tail resemble plumes of ash is also a really nice touch. The red and black colour scheme working really well. I'm going to be honest, I've thought hard about this one. I'm not a huge fan of Hisuian Zoroark. The original is one of the sickest designs the series has ever come up with. The colour scheme, the abilities, the ponytail, it's all just mwah. It's as perfect as a Pokemon design can be. There's something about this design that just seems a bit overdone. Hisuian Zoroark in canon is said to be much more vicious and feral compared to its modern day counterpart. Even so, this one just doesn't click with me. It's a shame because I really like Zorua's design, that one's great. My least favourite would probably be Hisuian Goodra. He just looks ill, what have you done to my happy boy? So once you're in the field, you're probably going to want to start catching some Pokemon, however, there's a few things you'll need to keep in mind first. There are no random battles in Pokemon Legends Arceus. Every battle must be initiated manually by throwing one of your Pokemon via the right trigger. However, before that happens, you also need to be aware of the nature of your target. Some Pokemon are skittish, others will attack you on sight. Then there are those that will only get aggressive when you make the first move. This is incredibly important because your target can just straight up run away or aggro other Pokemon, forcing you into a multi-battle. More so than in any other Pokemon game, your level doesn't really make that much of a difference in Arceus. You obviously don't want to be underleveled, but regardless, wild Pokemon hit for way higher damage than what you're likely used to. So while yes, the experience share is once again mandatory, its implementation here is nowhere near egregious. If you're not being careful, you can find yourself on the back foot very quickly. From there, the process is largely the same. Get their health down, chuck a ball, and pray to God. Gotta say, I really love the UI in this game. Having team switching and Pokeball just being on a little hotbar is super convenient. really speeds up the catching process, which is great because you'll be doing a lot of it. You can always forego the battle stage entirely and just catch them outright. If you want, you can just simply throw a Pokeball and hope for the best. The best way to do this is by keeping it out of sight, either by hiding in tall grass or by throwing something like a smoke ball. From there, hitting the Pokemon directly in the back without being spotted will give you the best catching odds. In addition to the staples, you also have additions like the Heavy Ball and the Wing Ball. Heavy Balls can't be thrown very far, but they're more effective on unsuspecting targets. Wing Balls, on the other hand, are incredibly fast and pinpoint. We're in olden times now, and Pokeballs aren't something you can just buy in your local 7-Eleven. There is a vendor that sells them, however they're incredibly expensive, and money is a scarce resource. In this case, we'll need to do it the old-fashioned way. By using materials like berries, awns and apricorns, you can craft consumables and Pokeballs to aid you on your quest. When asked why modern Pokemon games aren't rated as highly as the older ones, the typical answer you'll get is that they're too easy. However, I don't think that really hits on the core of the issue. By and large, Pokemon has always been a very easy game, especially if you use all the tools given to you like the legendaries. The difference between an Emerald or a Platinum compared to X and Y or Sword and Shield is that you still needed to keep your hands on the wheel. Classic example, EXP. Trainer EXP was a limited resource that needed to be handled with care, making sure to pass it around equally and optimise your entire team. The most efficient matchup may not be the best choice if there's a Pokemon lagging behind. Additionally, consider a Pokemon like Magikarp for example. A Pokemon that requires a high upfront level cost, but in return gets significantly better once it evolves. By slapping a permanent EXP shell on there, you've effectively just given the player way less to consider. You no longer have to make any difficult battle decisions or party selection. This small change takes this from an easy game to one that practically plays itself. Put simply, Pokemon Legends Arceus makes you pay much more attention than any other Pokemon game. Every failed throw, every heal in battle, those are resources that you gathered, potentially going to waste. It may not be much, but it does put a lot more weight onto your mistakes. This is also why I find the side quests to actually be quite helpful. A lot of the time in RPGs I don't tend to do these because they're just kind of pointless. They're either kill X number of these things or deliver this item to this person, and the only thing you get for it is currency or items that you could have bought at the shop. In the case of Legends Arceus though, because resources are so tight, especially in the beginning of the game, it can actually be quite helpful. Additionally, buffs now encompass both the special and physical stats. However, unlike before, they're not permanent and will disappear after a set number of turns. Pokemon natures remain, however abilities are not a thing in the Legends games, which means Geodude suddenly became a lot less annoying. Status conditions like sleep no longer immobilize the target completely, instead acting more like paralysis. Certain moves also function completely differently to how they would in the main series. Double hit, for example, buffs the damage of following attacks. The biggest change, however, is the turn chart, a la Final Fantasy X. Pokemon now have the ability to use Agile and Strong style moves once they've mastered a given move. Agile is faster but weaker, and Strong the opposite, each of them costing double the PP to use. Using these effectively, you can essentially score multiple moves in a row. Typically, you'll want to use Agile style moves for quick and easy buffs, or moves like 3 arrows for example with helpful secondary effects. Strong style moves can be very devastating, however use them wrong and you could leave yourself massively vulnerable. As I said, there is no gyms or league of any kind. Instead, you'll be part of the Survey Corps, going outside the walls to fight Titan Pokemon. Gotta catch 'em all has been the motto for the series since its inception, and more so than ever, Legends Arceus actually lives up to that. The bulk of the game has you helping Professor Lamington create the world's first complete Pokédex. Simply catching a Pokemon is enough to register it, however, you also have to clear additional research tasks. Catches, times defeated, using certain moves, that kind of thing. Doing these will give you research points. Do enough of them and you get a gold star. Increasing your rank will give you more advanced crafting recipes, as well as the level threshold for the Pokemon that you can use in battle. You can catch anything you like, however if the level's too high, it will refuse to obey. This mainly applies to Alpha Pokemon. In contrast to Beta Cucks, Alpha Pokemon have a higher base effort level, as well as being found at absurdly high levels. They're also fucking massive. That is one cool detail about this game, is that not only are the Pokemon scaled properly, Even Pokemon of the same species come in different sizes, something to make your Pokemon feel unique. Unlike regular encounters, alphas must be battled in order to capture. It's a tall order, but if you manage to do it, you can get your hands on some serious firepower. But like I said, given the nature of multi-battles and the fact that AI Pokemon generally do more damage anyway, the level difference isn't really going to be as much of an instant win as you'd think. For the best ones, you also need to put in a little bit of effort to max out your level cap, so it's balanced in that way. Alphas can appear randomly, however the majority you'll find are static encounters, a great source of experience. Occasionally you'll come across space-time distortions which can spawn rare items and Pokemon at the cost of them being higher level and coming in swarms. It's here that you can get evolutionary items, including the new Link Cable item. This is exactly what you think it is. As this is a more single player oriented experience, any Pokemon that required trading before can now simply be given an item. This is one of the greatest additions to a modern Pokemon game, so naturally it doesn't return in the next one. You can also get these in the village using points you get from finding lost satchels. You've still got to put in the work, but it's still very convenient. In terms of the environments themselves, they're all quite basic. Forest, beach, snow. They're also not going on the fridge either. This is one fugly looking game. Very murky textures and a rather muted colour palette. That being said, where these areas truly shine is via traversal. You start out on foot, but gradually you'll gain access to 5 different ride Pokemon. These can take you across the land, sea and sky, letting you access new areas and thereby more Pokemon. What I love about these is that they're instantaneous. The minute I hit the ground after a flight or being on the water, I'll instantly switch to Wurdeer. No annoying prompts, nothing. It's brilliant. And if I want to climb or take flight again, it's merely a button press away. The act of doing research tasks and scouring the land for that one missing Pokemon might seem incredibly tedious, but getting around is so fast and fun that it's really a non-issue. Any excess Pokemon you don't need can also be exchanged for EV enhancing rocks. I don't know how these are supposed to work, they just kind of do. Whenever I start a new playthrough of a Pokemon game, I typically have my entire team mapped out before I even reach the title screen. However, thanks to the more non-linear collectathon nature of Arceus, I more or less end up assembling my team on a whim, which makes for a much more interesting and chaotic experience. I will say, however, for an open world-esque game, I feel like 250 is way too small a pool. It doesn't take too long before you start seeing the same creatures repeat themselves. 50 to 100 more mons would have been perfect. I'm also a big fan of the setting itself. Sinnoh is my favourite region because of how much it expanded the Pokemon world, and part of that is the myths and folklore that came along with it. No, not that one. Actually getting to see how these civilizations came to be 20 years later is highly rewarding if you're a fan. This also might come off a bit weird, but it's nice to play a Pokemon game that feels distinctly Japanese again. Ever since Gen 5, the series has used the entire globe as inspiration, which I think was the correct thing to do. We've gotten a wide range of varied and exciting locations since then. But in that, I also feel like something was lost. And while not a requirement, it's nice to see Pokemon go back to its roots. Should you manage to get a 10 on all of your Pokédex entries, you'll be given a Shiny Charm, something that, to be blunt, I don't really think is worth the hassle. Shiny Pokemon and Legends Arceus are about as synonymous as Minecraft and Predators. With how many Pokemon spawn at once, you'll likely see at least one on a given playthrough. Even then, you can grind out the mass outbreaks which give a 1 in 200 chance. Not that I'd ever do anything sad like that. So, about these boss fights. Ladies and gentlemen, we have iframes. That's right, it's Dark Souls. It's 100% Dark Souls. It's dark. The rules here are simple. Rather than beating them harder than the start of December, you instead throw gummy worms at them before their body succumbs to exhaustion. Either that or high cholesterol. There's also brief windows where you can do battle with them and deplete their hangry gauge faster. If you aren't used to action games, these can actually be quite hard. It's because of this I don't particularly mind the game being lenient with checkpoints, since most people who play turn-based RPGs generally aren't expecting anything physically demanding. The only one I have trouble with is Arcanine. His arena is already an odd shape, so when Fire Spin locks you into a really small area it can be a tad bullshit. After dealing with the ongoing threat of giant glowing dogs and bulls, you wake up to the sky having a seizure. The village chief making the sensible decision to expel the only person capable of doing anything. I'd like to point out that before I came along, these people couldn't even handle a couple of angry beavers. Beavers. So we take refuge in this old lady's house, who tells us to seek out the Lake Trio and form the Red Chain, hoping to counteract the current disaster. And so, chain in hand, we put everybody in their place, concluding with a battle against the almighty Sinnoh, and the other one. A bit more preparation later, we do battle with Dialga's origin form, which looks terrible, you might be thinking, but it could be worse. Could be Palkia. Never piss off Arceus. If he doesn't cast you to hell or strand you in another world, he'll straight up turn you into a paraplegic. The day is saved, but as a break from the norm, we've actually got a decent post-game to go through this time around. It's mainly just hunting down the legendaries. Kinda wish these were more fleshed out. These Pokemon are basically the fabric that makes up the entire world. I'm also shocked that the other Reggies didn't make an appearance here. As far back as Gen 3, it stated that they were keys to stop a more powerful entity. One of the few times a Pokemon is foreshadowed before their debut, and one I would have liked to see play out. You do this to get plates because a highly religious man named Volo wants to get closer to God. Who's Volo? That's a good question. Volo is introduced to you early on and just kind of never goes away. Always knowing where you are even when you get kicked out of your own home. See, it turns out that this grown man who likes stalking children is actually a crazy cultist bent on tearing down and rebuilding the entire world, who also likes to stalk children. Volo's portrayal is treated as some kind of huge twist online, but I don't know if it's because I'm just big-brained, but I did not trust this fucker from the start. This dude gave me Happy Mask Salesman vibes. It's typical, isn't life shit and unfair, let's kill everything. You know, the kind of thing a millennial would say, thinking that they're being deep and edgy, when actually they're just being gay. You know, the kind of thing that you've heard in at least 5 other RPGs. He's also responsible for the whole space-time incident. Not really much to worry about though, he's just some crackhead cultist. This is gonna be no— oh. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to hell. Somebody at Game Freak took those brain-dead comments to heart because this is the hardest fight ever cooked up in a Pokemon game. Giratina is here because he hates his dad. Right from the offset, let's just take some time to understand what it is we're up against here. Not only are we battling what is essentially a gender-bent Cynthia, but on top of that, the 2 forms of Giratina, essentially making this an 8v6 fight. This boss is about as difficult as being a sane man on blue sky. And before you ask, no, you don't get healed between fights. Normally I have a strict no item rule. I also wanted to get this video out 6 months ago, I've never really been one to commit. Hats off to you Game Freak, I submit. Please don't fuck up Unova. Once you beat him, his stairway to heaven is officially denied and he goes off somewhere to sulk. It's at this point you can challenge Arceus yourself if you've caught every Pokemon. It's a rather long and intense fight that will unlock the Azure Flute event in the Sinnoh remakes once completed, which I'm not sure if that's a reward or a punishment. You're going to hate me for this. Funny thing, I initially thought that you needed a 10 in all of the Pokédex entries to get to this fight. Turns out that was strictly for the shiny charm. So I essentially procrastinated doing this video over nothing. Whoops. I will say though, I love the remix of Arceus' theme. It's one of the most grand and ominous in the entire series. I distinctly remember getting jump scared by this when I hacked one in on my DS. The soundtrack in general is fantastic, all of the remixes slap. Specifically, the legendary theme, the Lake Trio and Giratina's origin theme are some of my favourites. Crimson Mylands is also a banger, and hearing the faint whispers of Eterna Forest when going to fight Cleavor was a very nice touch and put a genuine smile on my face. Going into Legends Arceus, I was worried that the initial honeymoon phase from 2022 had worn off. This was my first time playing the game front to back since release, and I had fun. In fact, even having to play it twice, I still really enjoyed it. It's rough in some areas, but unlike BDSP or Sword and Shield, I actually get the feeling that the people worked on this actually enjoyed themselves. And as a result, I enjoyed playing it. It ain't perfect, but it delivers the kind of open world Pokemon fantasy that many of us have dreamed of since childhood. I don't think I'd put this quite on the same level as the GBA or DS games, but it's easily some of the best Pokemon content we've got in years. Which isn't a high bar, but it's good. It's like being the most successful creator on Blip.tv. Sarcasm aside though, if you've been burned by the last few games, this one is very much worth your time. It's a game that I thoroughly enjoy and one that I can happily recommend to everybody, which as far as Pokemon is concerned is something that you savour nowadays because you never know when the next good game will be. With all that being said, join me in 3 years when we cover the next one. Bye!